They say a vow is forever, until it becomes inconvenient. Serafina Sterling thought her life was perfect. A wealthy husband, a beautiful home, and a future full of promise. But one medical diagnosis shattered it all. In a single heartbeat, the man who swore to protect her threw her into the freezing rain, like garbage, replacing her with a woman who carried what she couldn't. Broken homeless and wishing for the end, she didn't see the black SUV pulling up to the curb. She didn't know that while she had lost a husband, she had just been found by the devil himself. And when the most feared Mafia don in the city rolled down his window and said, "Come with me," her nightmare was about to turn into a rain of vengeance. The silence in Dr. Fredrickson's office was not peaceful. It was suffocating. It smelled of antiseptic and bad news. Serafina Sterling sat on the edge of the leather chair, her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles had turned the color of old parchment. Beside her, Richard Sterling, a man whose face had graced the cover of Forbes and Legal Times, 3 times in the last decade checked his Rolex. He didn't look at her. He looked at the time, as if this appointment were merely a traffic jam delaying him from something more important. "I'm afraid the results are conclusive, Mrs. Sterling. Dr. Fredrickson," said his voice dropping to that practiced somber tone doctors use when they have to crush a soul. He pushed a file across the mahogany desk. "The scarring on your uterine lining is extensive. It is hostile. Conception is naturally impossible, and IVF has a less than 1% chance of success." Serafina felt the air leave the room. "But we've only been trying for a year. Maybe there's a treatment." "A surgery." "We have tried the treatments, Serafina," Richard said. It was the first time. He had spoken in 20 minutes. His voice was cold, clipped the same tone he used when dismissing a junior associate. He stood up, buttoning his charcoal Italian suit jacket. "Doctor, are you saying she is barren? Use the word." "Richard." Serafina gasped, tears stinging her eyes. "It is a medical reality, Mr. Sterling," the doctor stammered, clearly uncomfortable with Richard's brutality. "In layman's terms, yes. She cannot carry a child." Richard didn't look at his wife. He looked at the doctor, nodded once, and turned to the door. "Send the bill to my office. We're done here." "Richard!" "Wait." Serafina scrambled to follow him, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor of the clinic's hallway. She caught his arm near the elevator. "Please talk to me. We can adopt. We can use a surrogate. There are so many ways to be a family." Richard spun around, ripping his arm from her grasp with such force she nearly stumbled. His eyes, usually a charming hazel that won juries over, were dead. "I am a Sterling, Serafina. My bloodline goes back to the founding of this city. I do not adopt strays. I do not rent wombs. I breed heirs. And you—" He looked her up and down, a look of pure disgust, as if she were a luxury car that had turned out to be a lemon. "You are a broken vessel." The drive back to their estate in the Hamptons was silent. Serafina stared out the window, the grey sky mirroring the hollow ache in her chest. She convinced herself he was just in shock. He was grieving. They would get home, pour a glass of wine, and he would hold her. They would get through this. She was wrong. When the heavy iron gates of the Sterling Manor swung open, Serafina noticed something odd. Richard's assistant, Jessica, a petite, sharp-eyed blonde who had always smiled too sweetly at Serafina, was standing on the front porch, and next to her were 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases. Serafina recognized them. They were hers. "Richard, why is Jessica here?" Serafina asked, her voice trembling. "And why are my bags outside?" Richard stopped the car. He didn't kill the engine. The low hum of the Mercedes vibrated through the seats. "Get out," he said. "What?" I said. "Get out." Richard unlocked the doors. "Jessica has packed your essentials. Anything else you think you own, my lawyers will determine if you're entitled to it. But considering the prenuptial agreement stated that your primary role was to provide an heir within 3 years, you are in breach of contract." "Breach of— Richard, I'm your wife, not an employee!" Serafina screamed, the shock finally giving way to hysteria. "You were an investment," Richard sneered. He looked through the windshield at Jessica, who was resting a hand protectively over her stomach. A small, round bump was visible beneath her tight dress. Serafina followed his gaze. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the gut. The late nights at the office, the business trips to frantic weekends in Paris. Jessica wasn't just an assistant. "She's 4 months along," Richard said, his voice softening only when he looked at his mistress. "It's a boy. A true sterling. She's moving in today, which means you need to leave. Now." You cheated on me," Serafina whispered. "While I was taking injections, while I was crying myself to sleep, wondering what was wrong with me. I was securing my legacy," Richard said, without a shred of remorse. "Now get out of my car before I have security drag you out." Serafina stumbled out of the car. The moment her feet hit the gravel, Richard floored the accelerator, the car screeching forward to where Jessica waited. Serafina watched as her husband, the man she had loved for 5 years, walked up the steps, kissed another woman, and led her into the house that Serafina had decorated. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The lock clicked. And then, as if the universe wanted to mock her pain, the sky opened up. Freezing rain began to pour, soaking her silk blouse in seconds. She stood there shivering, looking at her suitcases, realizing she had no car, no money. Richard controlled the accounts and nowhere to go. She was 26 years old, and her life was over. Night fell quickly, bringing with it a biting wind that cut through Serafina's wet clothes. She had dragged her suitcases 3 miles down the winding private road just to get to the public highway. Her heels had broken hours ago, so she walked barefoot, the asphalt tearing at her skin. She ended up in the meat-packing district, an industrial area on the edge of the city that transformed into a playground for the dangerous once the sun went down. She sat on a damp wooden bench under a flickering streetlight, her shivering uncontrollable. She had tried calling her parents. Her mother had listened to the story, paused and said, "Richard is a powerful man, Serafina. If he says you breached the contract, we cannot afford to go against him. His firm handles your father's pension. Perhaps you should apologize. Apologize for being cheated on. Apologize for being infertile." Serafina hung up and threw the phone into a puddle. "Hey there, sweetheart." The voice was rough, slurring. Serafina looked up. 3 men emerged from the shadows of an alleyway. They wore leather jackets and smelled of stale beer and aggression. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, stepped closer, kicking one of her suitcases. "Nice bags," the scarred man said. "What's a pretty little rich girl doing out here in the trash?" "Please," Serafina whispered, hugging herself. "I have nothing. Just leave me alone." "You don't have nothing." The second man laughed, licking his lips. "You got to you." They circled her like sharks. Serafina stood up, backing away, but her back hit the cold brick wall of a warehouse. There was nowhere to run. The scarred man reached out his dirty fingers, grazing her wet cheek. She flinched, a scream trapping itself in her throat. "Don't be shy," he sneered. Daddy's gonna take care of. Click. The sound was subtle, but it silenced the entire street. It was the unmistakable mechanical click of a safety being disengaged on a high-caliber weapon. "I suggest you step away from the lady," a voice said. It was a voice like velvet wrapped around a razor blade. Deep authoritative and terrifyingly calm. The three thugs froze. They turned toward the street. A matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom had pulled up silently against the curb. The rear door was open. Standing there, holding a black umbrella that seemed to shield him, not just from the rain, but from the filth of the world, was a man. He was tall, towering over 6'3". He wore a bespoke black suit that cost more than the building Serafina was leaning against. His hair was dark, swept back, revealing a face that was devastatingly handsome, but hard like a statue carved from granite. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, dark gray and piercing. "Who the hell are you?" the scarred thug barked, trying to sound tough, though his hand drifted toward his pocket. The man in the suit didn't blink. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply lifted his right hand. 2 red laser dots appeared instantly on the scarred man's chest. From the shadows behind the Rolls-Royce, 4 men in tactical gear materialized, silent as ghosts holding assault rifles. "I am the man who decides if you breathe for another 10 seconds, the stranger said. "Now, run." The thugs didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled over each other, tripping in the wet street, disappearing into the dark alley faster than rats. The stranger didn't watch them go. His eyes were locked on Serafina. He handed the umbrella to one of his guards and walked toward her. The rain fell on his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to notice. He stopped 2 feet away from her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He smelled of expensive cologne tobacco and gun oil. Serafina slid down the wall, her legs finally giving out from exhaustion and terror. Are you going to kill me too?" The man crouched down, balancing effortlessly on the balls of his feet. He reached out. Serafina flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, he took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm and heavy. "If I wanted you dead, Serafina, you would have died 3 years ago," he said softly. Serafina's eyes widened. You know my name?" The man stood up and extended a hand. A large, calloused hand that had clearly seen violence, yet offered safety. "I know everything about you," he said. "I know Richard threw you out. I know about the diagnosis. And I know that you are currently freezing to death." He looked down at her, his grey eyes burning with an intensity that made her heart race not from fear, but from something else. "My name is Lucien Valeri," he said. "And I am offering you a choice. You can stay here and die of hypothermia, or you can take my hand, come with me, and watch the world that broke you burn to the ground." Serafina looked at his hand. Then she looked at the dark, empty street where her husband had left her. She had nothing left to lose. She reached up and took his hand. "Come with me," he repeated, pulling her up as if she weighed nothing. The drive was silent, but it wasn't the cold silence she had experienced with Richard. This silence was heavy, protective. Serafina sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that Lucien had produced from a hidden compartment. He sat across from her, reading documents on a tablet, occasionally glancing at her to make sure she was still conscious. They didn't go to a house. They went to the center of the city, to the Valeri Tower, a glass needle piercing the skyline. The car drove directly into a private underground elevator. When the doors opened, they were in a penthouse that spanned the entire top floor. The view was breathtaking. The entire city lay beneath them, glittering like spilled diamonds. But the interior was stark black marble steel modern art that looked like slashed canvas. It was a fortress, not a home. "Sit," Lucienne commanded, pointing to a sprawling velvet sofa near the fireplace. Serafina sat. A maid appeared instantly with a tray of tea and hot soup. Serafina ate voraciously, her hands shaking. Lucienne stood by the floor-to-ceiling window watching the city, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. "Why?" Serafina asked finally, her voice raspy. "Why did you help me?" "Who are you really?" Lucienne turned. The firelight danced in his eyes, making them look almost predatory. "I told you. I am Lucienne Valeri. In the newspapers, I am a shipping magnate. In the streets, I am the capo dei capi, the boss of bosses." Serafina froze. She had heard the name Valeri. Everyone had. It was a name whispered in fear. He ran the docks, the unions, the underground gambling. He was a criminal, a monster. "You're the Mafia," she whispered. "I am power," he corrected. "Something your husband thinks he has, but only rents. I own it." He took a sip of his drink. "As for why I helped you, tell me, Serafina, did you really think you were infertile?" Serafina blinked. "The doctor, Dr. Fredrickson, said the scarring was extensive." Lucienne walked over to a safe hidden behind a painting. He punched in a code, the heavy steel door clicking open. He pulled out a manila folder and tossed it onto the coffee table in front of her. "Dr. Fredrickson has a gambling debt of $2 million, Lucienne said calmly. "A debt he owes to one of my casinos. Last week, Richard Sterling paid off that debt in full, in cash." Serafina stared at the folder. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were medical charts. Her medical charts. But these were different. "I had my own doctors hack the clinic's server before Richard had the records altered," Lucienne explained. "Read the bottom line." Serafina's eyes scanned the page. "Patient name, Serafina Sterling. Reproductive health optimal. No scarring detected. Fertility levels high." I don't understand," she stammered, the room spinning. "If I'm healthy." "Why? Because Richard didn't want a child with you," Lucienne said, his voice dropping to a growl. "He wanted to discard you without losing half his assets in a divorce. The prenup says if you fail to provide an heir, you get nothing. If he divorces you for any other reason, you get half. He paid the doctor to lie to make you believe you were broken, so he could kick you out penniless and move his mistress in." A scream ripped through Serafina's chest. It was a sound of pure agony. The betrayal was total. He hadn't just cheated. He had gaslit her, medically violated her, and destroyed her self-worth just to save money. She collapsed forward, sobbing into her hands. "He took everything. He took my life." "He took your past," Lucienne said. He walked over and sat next to her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a heat source. "He did not take your future." Lucien reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black box. He placed it on the table next to the file. "I have a proposition for you, Serafina." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "What? Richard Sterling is trying to expand his real estate empire into the North Docks, my territory. He is becoming a nuisance. I need to crush him. Not just kill him. Death is too easy. I want to destroy his reputation, his fortune, and his legacy." Lucien leaned in close, his voice a seductive whisper. I need a wife. A partner who knows his secrets. A woman who has a reason to hate him as much as I do. Marry me, Serafina. Become Mrs. Valerie. And together we will take everything he loves, piece by piece. You want me to marry you? She asked, incredulous. I just met you. You need protection. I need a queen, Lucien said. And frankly, I have been watching you for a long time. You are stronger than you think. You didn't break when he threw you out. You survived. He opened the small black box. Inside sat a ring, a massive, flawless black diamond, surrounded by rubies. It looked like a drop of blood in the night. Richard treated you like a broken doll, Lucien said. I will treat you like a weapon. So what do you say? Do you want to cry over a man who never loved you? Or do you want revenge? Serafina looked at the ring. She thought of Richard's sneer. She thought of Jessica's hand on her stomach. She thought of the rain. She reached out and took the ring. It was cold, heavy, and sharp. I want him to suffer, she whispered. Lucien smiled. It was a dark, terrifying smile. Good, he said. Then let the games begin. The transition from Serafina Sterling, the discarded housewife, to Serafina Valeri, the Mafia queen, did not happen overnight. It happened in the quiet, brutal hours of the early morning in the penthouse gym, and in the cold, echoing silence of Lucien's private shooting range in the basement of the tower. 3 days after she arrived, the marriage contract was signed. It wasn't a ceremony of flowers and white lace. It was signed on a heavy oak desk, witnessed by Lucien's consigliere, a terrifyingly quiet man named Silvio. There were no vows of love, only vows of loyalty and mutual destruction of their enemies. You are shaking, Lucien noted as she held the pen. I'm not shaking because I'm scared, Serafina replied, her voice gaining a steeliness that hadn't been there a week ago. I'm shaking because I'm angry. Good, Lucien murmured, watching her sign her new name. Anger is fuel. Sadness is just an anchor. For the next 3 weeks, Serafina ceased to exist to the outside world. Richard Sterling had likely told their social circle she had run off to Europe or had a mental breakdown. He was probably already erasing her trace from the Hamptons estate painting over the nursery she had designed, replacing her existence with Jessica's swelling belly. The thought made Serafina aim the Glock 19 with deadly precision. Bang, bang, bang. 3 shots, all in the center mass of the paper target. You're flinching on the recoil. Lucien's voice came from right behind her ear. He moved closer, his chest pressing against her back, his hands covering hers on the grip of the gun. The heat radiating from him was distracting a raw, masculine power that made her breath hitch. I've never held a gun before this week, she defended herself. Richard has armed security, Lucien said, adjusting her stance, his fingers lingering on her waist. If this war goes the way I plan, you will be a target. I cannot be everywhere at once. You must be able to protect yourself. I thought you were the big bad wolf who scared everyone away. She challenged, turning her head slightly. Their faces were inches apart. Lucien's grey eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of danger and a growing, undeniable attraction that neither acknowledged. Even wolves have hunters, Serafina, and now that you are wearing my ring, you are hunting big game. He stepped back, breaking the spell. Get dressed. Tonight is the unveiling. The unveiling. The Metropolitan Winter Gala, Lucien said, checking his cufflinks. Every power player in New York will be there. senators, judges, billionaires, and Richard Sterling. Serafina froze. He'll be there with her. Yes, he is on the board of the charity. It's his big moment to show off his new family and solidify his reputation as a philanthropist. Lucien walked to the door, pausing to look back at her. It is time to show him that he didn't throw away trash. He threw away a diamond. 2 hours later, Serafina stood before the full-length mirror in the master bedroom. The woman staring back was a stranger. Gone were the pastel cardigans and sensible heels Richard preferred. Her hair, once kept in a modest bun, now cascaded in loose dark waves down her back. Her makeup was sharp, smoky eyes and blood-red lips. But it was the dress that was the true weapon. Lucien had commissioned it personally. It was a floor-length gown of emerald green silk, the color of money, of envy, of poison. It was backless, plunging dangerously low, hugging every curve of her body before flaring out at the feet. It was a dress that said, "Look at me. You can't touch me." Around her neck, the black diamond necklace Lucien had given her rested against her skin, cold and heavy. When she walked into the living room, Lucien stopped mid-sentence. He was on the phone, but he slowly lowered the device, his eyes raking over her form with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He ended the call without saying goodbye. "You look—" He paused, searching for the word. "Lethal." "Is that a compliment?" Serafina asked, smoothing the silk over her hips. Lucien walked over and offered his arm. He looked devastating in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. "In my world, Serafina, it is the highest compliment there is. Are you ready to go to war?" Serafina took a deep breath. She thought of the rain. She thought of the doctor's office. She thought of Richard's face. "I'm not just ready," she said, her eyes flashing. "I'm starving for it." The Metropolitan Winter Gala was held at the Pierre Hotel, a venue dripping with crystal chandeliers and old money. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and hypocrisy. Richard Sterling stood near the center of the ballroom, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking every bit the master of the universe. Clinging to his arm was Jessica. She was wearing a white dress, clearly chosen to emphasize her innocence and her pregnancy. She looked smug, rubbing her belly whenever a photographer came near. "You must be so excited, Richard," a senator's wife gushed, "after all the trouble, with your ex-wife, to finally have an heir on the way." Richard put on his practiced, mournful expression. "Yes, well, Serafina had her struggles. It was a tragedy, really. But Jessica, she has been a blessing, a true miracle. To the new generation of Sterlings," a banker toasted. Richard clinked his glass, smiling. He felt invincible. He had shed the dead weight of his barren wife, his stocks were up, and his reputation was spotless. Then the room went quiet. It started at the entrance, a hush that rippled through the crowd like a wave. The jazz band faltered and stopped. Heads turned. Whispers broke out, frantic and confused. Richard frowned. "What is going on?" He turned toward the grand staircase. At the top of the stairs stood Lucien Valeri. The sight of him alone was enough to silence the room. The Mafia Don rarely attended such public events. He was a creature of the shadows. His presence here was a statement. But it was the woman on his arm that made Richard's glass slip from his fingers and shatter on the floor. Serafina descended the stairs like a queen approaching her throne. The emerald dress caught the light, making her glow. She didn't look broken. She didn't look like the weeping, pathetic woman he had kicked out of the car. She looked magnificent, powerful, untouchable. "Is that—" Jessica whispered, her grip on Richard's arm, tightening until her nails dug in. "Is that Serafina?" "Impossible," Richard choked out. She has no money. She has nowhere to go." Lucienne and Serafina reached the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted for them, a mixture of fear and awe, clearing a path. Lucienne's hand rested possessively on the small of Serafina's back. They walked straight toward Richard. Serafina's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her face was a mask of cool indifference. She locked eyes with Richard. She saw the shock, the confusion, and then the fear. "Richard," she said. Her voice was smooth, devoid of the trembling sorrow he was used to. "You dropped your glass. You always were clumsy when you were nervous." "Serafina." Richard stammered, his face draining of color. What are you doing here? And with him?" He looked at Lucien with genuine terror. Everyone knew who Lucien Valeri was, and everyone knew you didn't cross him. "Mrs. Valeri is accompanying her husband," Lucien said, his voice deep and carrying across the silent ballroom. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Valerie Richard looked like he had been slapped. "Husband, you married him. You've been gone 3 weeks. You moved your mistress in before my side of the bed was cold." "Richard," Serafina said, her voice rising just enough for the surrounding circle of elites to hear, "I think we both moved on quickly, though I seem to have upgraded." She looked pointedly at Jessica, then at Richard. The insult landed perfectly. Richard Sterling, the king of Wall Street, had been replaced. Jessica stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "You can't be here. This is a private event. Richard, tell security to throw this trash out." Lucien turned his head slowly to look at Jessica. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. It was a look so cold, so devoid of humanity, that Jessica actually took a step back, shielding her stomach instinctively. "I wouldn't speak if I were you, miss." Lucienne paused as if her name wasn't worth remembering. "The board of directors sent the invitation to me personally this morning. In fact, I just made a very generous donation, $5 million, which I believe makes me the guest of honor." Richard was trembling now. "Serafina, listen to me. You don't know what you're doing. This man is dangerous. He's a criminal. Come back to the house. We can talk. Talk." Serafina laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. "Like we talked in Dr. Fredrickson's office." Richard's eyes widened. He knew that she knew. "I suggest you enjoy your evening, Richard," Serafina said, stepping closer to him so only he could hear. "Drink the champagne, eat the caviar, because starting tomorrow, I am going to take apart your life brick by brick. You took my home, I'll take your empire. You took my dignity, I'll take your pride." She leaned back, smiling radiantly for the cameras that were now flashing blindingly around them. "Congratulations on the baby, by the way," she added, her eyes sliding to Jessica. "I hope he doesn't inherit his father's talent for betrayal." "Let's go, my love," Lucien said, offering his arm. "The air in here is stale." They turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing in a puddle of spilled scotch and shattered glass with the entire elite of New York City whispering behind their hands. As they walked away, Serafina felt a strange sensation. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. In its place was a burning, addictive rush of power. Lucien leaned down as they walked toward the balcony. "You did well." "I didn't do enough," Serafina whispered. He's still standing. Not for long, Lucienne promised. Tonight was the warning shot. Tomorrow, the slaughter begins. The next morning, the war officially started. Serafina woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of frantic shouting on the television. She walked into the living room, wrapping her silk robe tight. Lucien was sitting on the sofa watching the news, a satisfied smirk on his face. "What's happening?" she asked. Lucien pointed at the screen. The headline on CNBC blared in red letters, "Sterling Enterprises stock plummets amidst fraud investigation." "I had my contacts in the SEC leak a few documents this morning," Lucien said casually, turning a page of his newspaper. "Documents linking Richard's offshore accounts to money laundering operations. It's mostly fabricated, of course, but the audit will take months. By the time they clear his name, his stock will be worth less than toilet paper." Serafina watched the screen. Footage showed Richard being swarmed by reporters outside his office building, looking disheveled and panicked. "And that's not all," Lucien said. "I bought the debt on his Hamptons estate. The bank called in the loan an hour ago. He has 24 hours to pay $10 million, or they seize the property." "He doesn't have 10 million liquid," Serafina said, her mind racing. "He put everything into the new development project." "Exactly," Lucien said. "He is cash poor, and he is desperate." Lucien stood up and walked over to her. He ran a hand through her hair. "But a wounded animal is dangerous, Serafina. He will try to strike back. He won't come for me. He knows he can't. He will come for you." "Let him come," Serafina said. "He will try to use the one thing he thinks he has over you," Lucien warned. "The baby." As if on cue, Serafina's phone buzzed on the table. It was a number she had deleted, but knew by heart. "Richard." She picked it up. Lucien watched her, his body tense. "Answer it," Lucien said. "Put it on speaker." Serafina slid the icon to green. "Hello, Richard." "You bitch!" Richard's voice screamed through the speaker, distorted by rage. "You did this. You gave him the files. I don't know what you're talking about," Serafina said calmly. "I'm just a barren housewife, remember, too stupid to understand business." "Don't play games with me," Richard roared. "I know it was you. You want to play dirty, fine. You want to destroy me, I'll destroy you. I'm going to release the medical records, Serafina, the real ones, the ones that show you had a breakdown. I'll paint you as a mentally unstable gold digger who slept her way into the mob." "Do it," Serafina challenged. "And I'll release the recordings of you bribing Dr. Fredrickson." There was a silence on the other end, a long, heavy silence. "You don't have those," Richard whispered. "Try me," Serafina lied. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. "Listen to me," Richard hissed. "Meet me. Today. 1 hour. The old boathouse at the marina. Alone. If you bring your guard dog, I release everything I have on your family. Your father's pension fund, I can empty it with a click. Meet me, or your parents lose their home by sunset." The line went dead. Serafina looked at Lucienne. Her face was pale. "He's threatening my parents." Lucienne's expression darkened. The playful, vengeful smirk was gone. In its place was the face of the capo. "He just made a fatal mistake," Lucien said softly. "He threatened what is mine." "I have to go," Serafina said. "He'll do it. He handles their finances." "You will go," Lucien agreed. "But you won't be alone. And Richard Sterling isn't leaving that boathouse walking." Lucien walked to the wall and pulled a hidden panel open. Inside was an arsenal. He pulled out a small silver pistol and handed it to Serafina. "It's time to finish this, Mrs. Valeri." The marina was a graveyard of ships in the winter. Masts clattered against metal poles in the wind, a lonely skeletal sound. The boathouse sat at the end of the longest pier, its wood rotting and grey. Serafina stepped out of the taxi she had hailed, part of the ruse, to make Richard think she had come alone. She wore a long trench coat, her hands deep in her pockets. Her right hand gripped the cold steel of the small silver pistol Lucien had given her. She walked down the pier. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't stop. She pushed open the door to the boathouse. Inside it smelled of gasoline and damp wood. Richard was pacing back and forth near a workbench. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his tie loose, and his eyes were wild, bloodshot from lack of sleep and too much scotch. Jessica sat on a crate in the corner, looking less like a smug mistress and more like a frightened child. She was hugging her knees, shivering. "You came," Richard said, stopping his pacing. He let out a jagged laugh. "I knew you were still obedient deep down." "I'm here for my parents, Richard," Serafina said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "Leave them out of this." "I'll leave them out when you fix what you broke," Richard shouted, lunging forward, but stopping a few feet away. "Do you know what happened today?" "My investors pulled out. The SEC froze my accounts. I can't even buy a pack of gum. You and your mobster husband did this." "You did it to yourself," Serafina said calmly. "You got greedy. You treated people like assets to be liquidated. I'm just the liquidation sale." "I want it back," Richard screamed, slamming his hand on the workbench. He grabbed a sheaf of papers. "I have prepared a statement. You are going to sign it. It says that you lied, that Lucien Valeri coerced you, and that the allegations against me are false. You sign this, and I don't delete your father's pension. And if I don't, then I ruin them. And then—" He reached behind the workbench and pulled out a crowbar. "Then I teach you a lesson about loyalty." Jessica gasped. "Richard, you said we were just going to talk to her. You didn't say anything about hurting her." "Shut up!" Richard snapped at Jessica. "You're useless. All you do is whine. If you hadn't gotten pregnant, I wouldn't have had to rush this divorce." Serafina looked at Jessica. "You hear that you're just an inconvenience to him. Once the baby is born, he'll discard you just like he discarded me." "I said, sign it." Richard advanced on Serafina, raising the crowbar. Serafina didn't flinch. She didn't back away. She pulled her hand from her pocket and leveled the pistol at his chest. Richard froze. He looked at the gun, then at her face. He laughed nervously. "You won't shoot. You don't have the guts. You're Serafina. You cry at sad commercials. You save injured birds." "The woman who saved birds died the night you threw her out in the rain," Serafina said coldly. "Step back. You're bluffing," Richard snarled. He took another step. Bang! The shot was deafening in the small space. Richard screamed and dropped the crowbar, clutching his thigh. He collapsed to the ground, writhing in agony. "You shot me! You crazy bitch, you shot me!" "I aimed for the leg," Serafina said, her hands steady. "The next one goes in your knee. Do you want to walk again, Richard?" Suddenly, the shadows in the rafters of the boathouse moved. "Excellent aim, Tesoro," a deep voice rumbled. Lucien dropped from the upper loft, landing silently like a panther. He was followed by 4 of his men who emerged from the back entrance, guns drawn. Richard, clutching his bleeding leg, looked up in horror. You were here." Lucien walked over to Richard and kicked the crowbar into the water below. He crouched down, pressing the barrel of his own gun against Richard's forehead. "I am always where she is," Lucien whispered. "Did you really think I would let my wife meet a rat like you unprotected?" Lucien looked at Serafina. "What is your verdict, my queen? Shall we feed him to the fishes?" "The water is very cold today." Serafina looked down at the man she had once vowed to love forever. He was crying now, begging snot running down his nose. He looked pathetic. "No," Serafina said. She holstered her gun. "Death is too easy. He needs to live with it." She turned to Jessica. "The accounts are frozen, but I happen to know he keeps a stash of emergency cash in the wall safe behind the painting in his office. The combination is your birthday, or it used to be mine. Try both." Jessica looked at Richard, then at Serafina. She stood up. "Jessica, don't you dare," Richard wheezed. "I'm the father of your child." "You just called me useless," Jessica spat. She grabbed her purse. "And for the record, Richard, I'm not sure it is yours. My yoga instructor has much better genes." Jessica ran out of the boathouse. Richard roared in incoherent rage. "Here is the reality, Richard," Lucien said, standing up. "The development project you invested your last liquid assets in the North Docks expansion. That company belongs to me. You handed your fortune directly into my pocket. You are bankrupt, you are bleeding, and you are alone." Lucien took Serafina's hand. "Let's go. We have a dinner reservation." They walked out into the cold air, leaving Richard Sterling screaming into the void, a broken man in a rotting house. 6 months later. The fluorescent lights of the visitation room at the Otis Bantam Correctional Center on Rikers Island buzzed with a headache-inducing hum. Richard Sterling sat on a bolted-down metal stool, his wrists chafing against the handcuffs. The charcoal Italian suits were gone, replaced by a jumpsuit the color of dirty dishwater. His hair, once styled with $100 gels, was thinning and grey shorn close to his scalp to prevent lice. He had been waiting for 20 minutes. His lawyer, a public defender because all his assets had been frozen by the SEC and then seized by the creditors, had promised news on his appeal. Richard clung to that hope like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. He convinced himself that this was all a nightmare, a temporary glitch in the matrix of his charmed life. He was a Sterling. Sterlings didn't rot in cages. The heavy steel door buzzed open, but it wasn't his overworked public defender who walked in. It was Silvio Lucian Valeri's consigliere. The older man wore a navy blue Brioni suit that cost more than the collective net worth of everyone in the cell block. He carried a leather briefcase and sat down opposite Richard with the calm demeanor of an undertaker. "Where is my lawyer?" Richard demanded, though his voice cracked, lacking its former authority. "Your lawyer is currently stuck in traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge," Silvio said smoothly. "A delivery truck jackknifed. Terrible luck. I thought I would keep you company." "I have nothing to say to you, or your boss," Richard spat. "Get out. I am not here to talk Mr. Sterling. I am here to deliver the mail." Silvio placed a single crisp envelope on the metal table. It bore the logo of a genetic testing laboratory. Richard stared at it. His heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "What is this?" "Jessica's child was born 3 days ago," Silvio said. "A healthy baby boy. She named him Tyler, a strong name." Richard felt a flicker of hope. A son. He had a son. Even if he was in here, he had an heir. A reason to fight. "I want to see him. I have rights. That boy is my legacy." Silvio's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Open the envelope, Richard." With trembling hands, Richard managed to tear open the flap despite the handcuffs. He pulled out the single sheet of paper. His eyes scanned the technical jargon, the markers, the percentages. He stopped at the bottom line, highlighted in yellow. Probability of paternity 0.0%. The room seemed to tilt. The air was sucked out of his lungs. "No," he whispered. "No, this is fake. You forged this." "We did not need to forge anything," Silvio said softly. "We simply paid for the expedited shipping. The father is a 24-year-old yoga instructor named Chad. Jessica has already moved in with him in Columbus, Ohio. She left no forwarding address for you." She lied." Richard slumped forward, his forehead hitting the cold metal table. The one thing he had destroyed his marriage for. The one thing he had thrown Serafina into the rain for. It was a lie. He had destroyed his life for a phantom. Irony is a cruel mistress, isn't it? Silvio stood up, buttoning his jacket. "You threw away a diamond to pick up a piece of broken glass, thinking it was a gem. Enjoy your stay, Mr. Sterling. The sentencing hearing is next week. I hear the judge is quite harsh on white-collar criminals who show no remorse." Silvio turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Oh, and one more thing. Turn on the television in the common room tonight at 6. There is a special report on the Valeri Charity Gala. You might see something miraculous. The miracle at Mount Sinai." Across the city, in the private VIP wing of Mount Sinai Hospital, the atmosphere was chaotic but jubilant. The entire floor had been rented out. Security detail dressed in tactical suits lined the hallways. Nurses and doctors moved with hushed urgency, aware that the man pacing the corridor was the most dangerous predator in New York City. Lucien Valeri looked nothing like the calm, collected Don. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled up, and his hair was a mess. He had been pacing for 6 hours. "Mr. Valeri." Dr. Evans, the chief of obstetrics, stepped out of the suite. Lucien was in front of him in a blink, grabbing the doctor by the shoulders. "Is she okay? Tell me she's okay, if anything happens to her." "She is fine, Lucien," the doctor said, using his first name to calm him. "She is perfectly fine, exhausted, but happy. And, well, you should go in." Lucien pushed past him. He entered the dimly lit room. It smelled of lavender and fresh linen. Serafina lay in the hospital bed, her dark hair fanned out against the white pillows. She looked tired, pale, but her eyes were shining with a light that rivaled the sun. In her arms she held 2 bundles. Lucien froze at the foot of the bed. "2," he whispered. Serafina smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "The ultrasound tech missed one. He was hiding behind his sister. Can you believe it, Lucien? The broken vessel. She carried 2. Lucien walked to the side of the bed. He fell to his knees, burying his face in the mattress near her hand. The man who could order a hit without blinking, who had brought the city's underworld to its knees, was weeping. "They said it was impossible," he choked out, looking at the babies. "They were wrong," Serafina whispered. She shifted one of the bundles. "Meet Leo, and this little fighter. This is Sophia." Lucien reached out a finger. The tiny hand of his son, Leo, wrapped around it. The grip was surprisingly strong. Then his daughter Sophia let out a small, indignant cry. "Twins," Lucien said, a laugh bubbling up from his chest, pure and unadulterated joy. "Richard wanted one heir, and we have a dynasty." "We have a family," Serafina corrected him gently. Lucien stood up and kissed her forehead, then her lips. It was a kiss of reverence. "Thank you. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for living. The coronation. 3 months later, the christening of the century, as the New York Times dubbed it, took place at the St. Patrick's Cathedral. It was a closed event, but the paparazzi swarmed the steps outside like ants. Inside, the pews were filled with a strange mix of people. On the left, the city's legitimate elite judges, politicians, actors, who couldn't afford to offend Lucien Valeri. On the right, the captains of the 5 families' men, with scarred faces and heavy coats, bowing their heads in respect. Serafina stood at the altar, wearing a white dress that mirrored the purity of the occasion, though her eyes held the sharpness of a woman who had walked through fire. Lucienne stood beside her, holding Leo, while she held Sophia. As the priest poured the holy water, Serafina looked out at the crowd. She saw fear in some eyes, respect in others, but she was looking for something else. She found it in the back row. Her parents were there. They looked older, tired, but safe. Lucien had not only saved their home, he had anonymously restored her father's pension with interest. They caught her eye and smiled tentatively. They still didn't quite understand the world their daughter now ruled, but they knew she was safe. After the ceremony, the reception was held at the Plaza Hotel. It was an opulent display of power. Champagne flowed like water. Serafina was standing on the balcony, getting a moment of fresh air, when Silvio approached her. "Mrs. Valeri." He nodded respectfully. "I thought you should know. The news regarding Mr. Sterling." Serafina didn't turn. She watched the traffic on Fifth Avenue. "Go on." He was transferred to a maximum security facility in upstate New York yesterday. During the transfer, there was an incident in the yard. Serafina turned slowly. "Is he dead?" "No," Silvio said. Lucienne gave strict orders that death was forbidden. But Mr. Sterling will require a cane to walk for the rest of his life, and perhaps a wheelchair. It seems he slipped. Repeatedly. Serafina took a sip of her champagne. A year ago, she would have felt horror. She would have cried for the cruelty of it. Now, she felt a cold, hard satisfaction. It was the balance of the universe correcting itself. Richard had tried to cripple her spirit. The universe had crippled his body. "Send him a postcard, Silvio." Serafina said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Send him a picture of the twins. Write the legacy on the back. Nothing else." Silvio bowed deeply. "As you wish, Donna Serafina." He left, leaving her alone on the balcony. A moment later, warm arms wrapped around her waist from behind. Lucien rested his chin on her shoulder. "You look dangerous when you're thinking," he murmured against her neck. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," she said, leaning back into him. "Lucien, do you think I'm a bad person for being glad he's suffering?" Lucien turned her around, so she faced him. The city lights reflected in his grey eyes. "You are not a bad person, Serafina. You are a survivor. In this world there are wolves and there are sheep. Richard tried to treat you like a sheep to be slaughtered. He forgot that you can marry the wolf and become one yourself." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Another gift," she laughed. "You already gave me the island in Greece for the birth." "This is different," Lucien said. He opened the box. Inside was a key. It was old, heavy, made of iron. "What is this?" "This is the key to the Sterling Manor in the Hamptons," Lucien said. "I bought it from the bank this morning. I was going to burn it down as a romantic gesture. But then I thought, no, why destroy it?" He pressed the key into her palm and closed her fingers over it. Turn it into a shelter, Lucian said. A sanctuary for women who have nowhere to go. Women who have been thrown out, beaten or discarded. Fill that house with people who survive. Let Richard sit in his cell and know that his precious legacy estate is now a fortress for the very women he despised. Serafina looked at the key tears welling in her eyes. It was the perfect revenge. To take the sight of her greatest trauma and turn it into a beacon of hope. You really are the devil, she whispered, smiling. Only to them, Lucian said, kissing her deeply. To you, I am just the man who holds the umbrella. The final scene. The camera pans out from the balcony of the Plaza Hotel, rising higher and higher. We see the glittering skyline of the New York City, a city of millions of stories. Down below, life moves on. But high above, in the penthouse, Serafina Valeri stands in the arms of the most feared man in the city, watching over her kingdom. She wasn't the woman who was thrown out in the rain anymore. That woman had washed away in the storm. In her place stood a queen. And as the screen fades to black, the sound of two babies crying loud, strong, and full of life echoes over the silence, the ultimate sound of victory. Richard Sterling learned the hard way that you cannot break a woman who is made of iron. He thought he was throwing away trash, but he handed a queen to a king. Serafina didn't just survive. She conquered. She took the pain of betrayal and forged it into a crown. In the end, the best revenge wasn't death. It was living a life happier than he could ever dream of. What would you do if you were Serafina? Would you have pulled the trigger? Or did she make the right choice, leaving him to rot in prison? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a twist. Until next time.